All right, let's jump right into this explainer on the fascinating history of Albuquerque. It's honestly a true tale of two cities. Today, we're going to explore how centuries of changing transportation, shifting global empires, and a massive physical split shaped this incredibly iconic southwestern metropolis. So whether you've walked these streets yourself or you're just fascinated by urban history, the story of how Albuquerque evolved is basically a masterclass in geographical evolution.
Here is the roadmap for our explainer today. We'll start with indigenous roots in Spanish rule, move on to changing empires in the Civil War, cover how the railroad brings new town, explore the jump from Route 66 to the Cold War, and finally, look at Old Town in modern times.
First up, indigenous roots and Spanish rule, laying the foundations. When we talk about the Rio Grande Valley, we are talking about an absolutely unbelievable span of human history. There is archaeological evidence of Paleo-Indian hunter-gatherers in the area going back literally 12,000 years. Gradually, these nomadic folks adopted a more settled agricultural lifestyle. By 750 CE, ancestral Puebloans were building these highly sophisticated multi-story dwellings. And by 1250, the Tiwo people were well established in the Albuquerque area, utilizing advanced irrigation and really complex trade networks. This was already a rich, thriving world long before the Spanish even arrived.
Now, you might be wondering about the city's name. In 1706, the settlement was officially named in honor of the 10th Duke of Albuquerque, who was serving as the Viceroy of New Spain at the time. So it was initially dubbed La Villa de Albuquerque. But as you can probably guess, somewhere along the centuries, that first R was completely dropped, giving us the modern spelling we use today. Sometimes, as historians like to joke, you just have to learn how to mispronounce things correctly.
What's really wild is how the town actually got on the map. Governor Francisco Cuervo y Valdés wanted the massive prestige of establishing a royally chartered town, a villa. So he wrote a letter to the Spanish king in 1706 claiming the town was perfectly laid out, already had a spacious church, and had exactly 35 families happily living there. Well, that was some classic political spin. The historical record shows he stretched the truth big time. There was no rush of settlers, the church was far from finished, and the population was tiny, basically just propped up by a detachment of 10 soldiers meant to protect the valley.
Moving on to Section 2, Changing Empires and Civil War, a frontier outpost.
Fast forward a bit. By 1821, Mexico gains independence from Spain, opening the area up to American trade via the Santa Fe Trail. Then, after the Mexican-American War in 1846, Albuquerque suddenly becomes a U.S. territory. At this point, it essentially turned into a dusty frontier army post. U.S. Attorney W.W.H. Davis gave it what we'd basically call a one-star review in 1853. He bluntly complained about the irregular layout and described the architecture as indifferent mud buildings, noting that army depots were practically the only thing pumping any money into the local economy.
Now, here's a piece of history that surprises a lot of people. Albuquerque actually saw action during the American Civil War. In March 1862, Confederate troops captured the town, hoping to use it as a base to take over the entire Western Territory. But things didn't go as planned. After a devastating loss of supplies at the Battle of Glorieta Pass, they had to pack up and retreat. During a skirmish known as the Battle of Albuquerque, those retreating Confederates literally buried their artillery cannons right there in the town plaza. And incredibly, you can still see replicas of those very cannons sitting in the plaza today.
Let's get into Section 3, The Railroad Brings New Town, the 1880 Schism.
Everything changed, and I mean everything, in 1880 when the Atchison, Topeka, and Santa Fe Railway finally rolled into town. But instead of building the station near the historic plaza, real estate speculators built a train depot a full mile-and-a-half away. This single decision created a literal tale of two cities. You had the original ancient settlement on one side and a booming, brand-new commercial hub clustering around the train tracks on the other.
These were two totally different worlds. The original plaza, which started being called Old Town, kept its traditional Hispanic culture, its organic winding layout, and its classic territorial adobe architecture. Meanwhile, the railroad gave birth to New Town, which is basically today's downtown. New Town was flooded with Anglo-American and European immigrants. It was built on a strict Midwestern-style grid with formal brick and wood Victorian buildings. For decades, they operated as two totally distinct, physically separated communities just staring at each other across the high desert. As New Town exploded in size, it became the economic powerhouse of the territory, hosting these massive territorial fairs. And I have to share this incredibly fun historical aside. During the 1882 fair, a runaway hot air balloon accidentally took flight without its pilot. It just soared off high above the scrambling crowds. That chaotic little mishap was officially the city's first ever balloon flight.
completely accidentally paving the way for the world-famous Albuquerque International Balloon Fiesta we know today.
Next up, Section 4. Route 66 to Cold War. The sprawl begins.
So if the railroad defined the 19th century, the automobile entirely rewrote the 20th. The construction of the legendary Route 66 straight through the city brought a massive wave of motels, neon signs, diners, and tourism. But the real shift happened with World War II. The establishment of the Albuquerque Army Air Base, which we now know is Kirtland Air Force Base, plus the city's central role connecting the top-secret Manhattan Project in nearby Los Alamos, brought an unprecedented federal investment, military personnel, and cutting-edge scientific research.
To put that boom into perspective, the population growth was staggering. Fueled by this massive military and scientific influx, Albuquerque went from roughly 35,000 residents in 1940 to over 200,000 by 1960. It nearly tripled in just one decade. And as the city rapidly expanded outward, it finally completely swallowed up that mile-and-a-half physical gap between Old Town and New Town, blanketing the whole valley in contiguous subdivisions, suburban shopping centers, and massive concrete freeways.
And that brings us to our final section, Old Town in Modern Times. Echoes of the past.
Now, here is a fascinating irony. Despite being called Old Town, almost nothing of the original 1706 settlement actually stands today. The absolute lone architectural survivor of the Spanish colonial period is the gorgeous San Felipe de Neri church, and even that had to be rebuilt in 1793 after the original structure collapsed. The rest of the historic district we see today was actually heavily modified or even entirely rebuilt during the 20th century to lean into the tourism industry.
And the contrast today, it is incredibly jarring. Old Town is this tiny 0.8 square mile island. Inside, it's beautifully pedestrian scaled, full of shaded courtyards and undeniable historic charm. But its borders are completely hard stops. You take one step just outside the historic perimeter and boom, you are immediately met with massive surface parking lots, multi-lane highways, and modern suburban chain stores right across the street. The modern auto-centric sprawl has entirely enclosed that original historic core.
So, I want to leave you with this final thought to wrap up our explainer today. As Albuquerque, and honestly cities all over the world, continue to sprawl and modernize, how do we effectively balance the authentic preservation of our deeply rooted history with the overwhelming concrete tide of modern urban development? It's a tough question, and it's one that Old Town wrestles with every single day. Thank you so much for joining me to explore this incredible tale of two cities.